sunny outside.
There's a game called Deathloop. It was one of the games that was going to be big for the PS5. And it just so happens, Mr. Ballen put out a video called They Discovered an Actual Deathloop.
So, is it like those movies where, like, you die and then you, like, have to relive the same day?
I'm not sure.
Or, like, you die different ways, but then you still have to die again?
When Deathloop came out, I was invested in some other things, so I really don't know much about it. I do know that my best friend was complaining about it. He wasn't the happiest with it. And
I've never heard of it.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's on Game Pass now. But anyway, let's see. I did the thing again. I've noticed editing videos that I will say, but anyway.
Your herbs are real kicking in.
In every single fucking video that we do.
But anyway.
It was a great time for it, right? They discovered an actual death loop. What could that mean?
Yeah, just like what I
get caught in like one of those tunnels of love that never ends.
I mean, that doesn't sound horrible.
Yes, it does, because what if you can't escape? It's like, oh, it's fun. We've been here for 2 hours. Now I'm ready to leave. Oh shit, I can't. Now we've been here for a week. It never ends. That would be a horrible death loop.
All right. I don't know, but we're going to find out.
Oh shit, I just had a really fucked up thought. Oh my god, you know, I was thinking about Deathloop, and because I'm a fucking redneck, I thought about Dale Earnhardt.
Why? Oh, Jesus Christ.
I feel so bad.
And then you had to
so
share that.
I feel so bad.
Wow. The circle of his life. All right.
All right.
3 for Dale. Let's go.
Let's do it.
Sometimes the truth. P.M. on the evening.
I don't want to be the guy to point this out, but I'm going to be the guy to point this out.
Stories.
Number 3, highway crash.
Around 7:20 p.m. on the evening of December 11th, 2002, a police department in a rural English county called Surrey started receiving all these frantic emergency calls. Now, all of these calls were coming from drivers on a heavily trafficked highway called the A3, and they all were saying the same things. They had seen this totally reckless driver with super bright headlights that was weaving in and out of traffic and going at high speeds and nearly crashing into people. And then a couple of the callers said they actually saw this car go down the embankment off the side of the highway, and so it looked like they might have crashed. And so, of course, this police department, after getting all these calls, decided to send out a couple of officers to see what was going on. When the 2 officers got out to the A3 and began patrolling the area on the A3 where all these calls were saying they had seen this reckless driver, they didn't see the driver. They didn't see a wreck on the side of the road. They didn't see any signs of an accident. I mean, there was nothing there. Now, had only one person called in about this wild, reckless driver, at this point, the officers would have chalked this up to a mistake or even a prank. But so many people called in about this one particular reckless driver on the A3 that these 2 officers decided to just keep on looking and really see if they can figure out where this driver went. And so to this point, the 2 police officers had been just driving on the A3 to try to find this driver. And so they decided they would park their vehicle, get out, and walk on foot on the edge of the highway because there were these huge forests that lined either side of the A3. In fact, Surrey, the county in England where this was one of the most heavily forested areas in all of England. And so these forests on either side of the A3 were very dense. You could not see very far into them. And so these officers were thinking that it might be possible that this driver, if they were driving as recklessly as all the callers made it seem like, they could have veered off the highway, gone down the embankment, and then because they were going at such a high speed, they could have crashed their way into one of these forests and basically disappeared from view from the road. That in order to see this crash in the forest, you'd have to be basically in the forest. And so these two officers, they pulled over, they got out, and they began walking along the edge of the highway, staring into the forest, looking for a sign of a car wreck. And sure enough, after walking for a while, one of the officers spotted something deep in the woods that looked almost metallic or plastic. Whatever it wasn't supposed to be in the forest. And so the officers made their way into the tree line and began walking through all the trees. And as they got closer, they realized very clearly there was a car. There was a wreck in the forest. And so the two officers, they begin running towards the wreck. They're calling for backup on the radio. They get to this wreck in the middle of the forest, and they're on the driver's side, and they look inside the car, and there's no driver in the driver's seat, but they looked through the car to the passenger side, and they saw the front passenger door was wide open, and on the ground on the other side of the car was very clearly a body. And so the two police officers rushed around the car to get a better look at the body. And when they did, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. It didn't make any sense. Like, what was this? Now, to understand why these police officers were so caught off guard by what they were seeing, we need to go back 5 months to July 16th, 2002. On that night, a 21-year-old man named Christopher Brian Chandler finished up his beer at a pub in West London. And for reference, where this pub was located was about 1 hour north of that stretch of the A3 highway in Surrey where the car was found in the woods. This night, Christopher had gone to this pub with a close friend of his. This was meant to be a fun night out. But, as Chris is finishing up this beer, he began to feel really antsy because it turned out Christopher was actually wanted by police in London for robbery, and so he hated staying in one place for too long. And so the only people who even knew where Christopher was the friend he was with at the bar, and then also Christopher's brother. He knew he was at this particular pub. And so finally, Christopher got so anxious about being in this pub for too long that he told the friend he was with that he just wanted to leave, and so he said goodnight to his friend. The friend stayed at the pub, and Christopher left, got in his car, and began driving south. But Christopher never arrived at the place he was trying to go. He just sort of disappeared, and nobody heard from him again. Christopher's brother eventually would report Christopher missing, but remember, the brother knows Christopher is wanted for robbery, and so Christopher suddenly going on the lam and just disappearing for a while was kind of par for the course, and so the brother really didn't think this was a big deal. And also, the police felt the same way because they know Christopher is trying to elude them, and so it makes sense he would be missing. And so as a result, nobody really followed up on Christopher's missing person report. Everybody just kind of moved on. That is, until 5 months later, when all those drivers began calling into the police in Surrey about seeing this totally reckless driver careening down the A3, who eventually crashed into a ditch. And then those two officers, they went out to that stretch of A3, and sure enough, it was Christopher's car, and the body on the ground was Christopher. However, there was a problem. When the two police officers walked up on Christopher's car and saw it for the first time, they were struck by how old it looked. But it didn't really register with them why that would matter. It just stood out to them that this is a really, really old and rusted up car. But when they went around to look at the body on the ground, Christopher's body, they saw that his body was actually mostly a skeleton, which meant Christopher did not crash and die on this night, December 11th, 2002. Very likely, he crashed and died 5 months earlier, right around the time he disappeared. Now, the Surrey police, they say that this was all just one big coincidence, that the reckless driver that all these drivers were reporting that night on the A3 must have not crashed and actually just kind of got away, and then just by coincidence, when the police were searching that area of the A3 for the reckless driver, they happened upon Chris and his car. But remember, several of the drivers who called in that night about seeing this reckless driver on the A3, they specifically said they saw the car veer off the embankment and crash down below near the tree line. Like, this is a serious crash. Someone needs to get out here with an ambulance because probably someone's hurt. And then when the police got out and searched the exact area where this crash supposedly happened, they find Chris's car that had all the hallmarks of a car that was driving recklessly on the A3 that veered off and crashed into the woods. I mean, they found Chris and his car because of these calls, but it could not have been Chris. But what other car could it have been? As of today, we do not have a good explanation for how this happened, and so it's been dubbed the A3 Ghost Crash. Well, we finally did it.
Okay, so normally I'm the one who's not the skeptic, and I'm like, ooh, spooky, weird coincidence that, like, means something. But on this one, I kind of feel like, no.
It was just a coincidence.
It was just a coincidence. They happened upon this. They finally found it. It took them 5 months. But maybe
then what
somebody...
were all the calls about? Just
Maybe that did happen, and, like, somebody did crash, and maybe, like, their car wasn't so badly fucked up that they were able to, like, get back up on.
before the police could get to it.
Jake told us it's not a highway, it's a motorway.
Yeah.
Which just is weird to me.
Motorway. Yeah. Drink driving.
No, that's Australia.
Yeah.
Anyway, what do you think?
I think that it's most likely a coincidence.
Yeah.
I think that the idea of somebody crashing in front of all these people, I mean, they would have pulled off to the side of the, like, if you see somebody run off the road and you keep driving, that's one thing. But if you see somebody's car, like, hit something really bad or something, your instinct as a human is to stop and try and go help.
So, psychology background is actually here to tell you that you're wrong.
Well, again, I was trained in, like, first responder shit, and it's just, like, beat into my brain to on instinct without thinking.
I think that that's how you would respond, but studies show that if there are a lot of people around, you're less likely to stop.
Because somebody else is going to do it.
Because your thought process is somebody else may be more qualified, not my problem. Which is fucked up, but that's what you think. But if there weren't a lot of people, like maybe you're like the only car, you probably would stop.
Let's do this. Let's implement a system. On a range of 0 to 10, how likely is this to be real? I'm giving this one a 2.
I was gonna say 2. I was gonna say 2.
So we're on the same page. Probably not. So let's.
But other stories we're totally not gonna be.
Right. Let's move on to the next.
I don't know if it was all the acid we poured into their contact lens solution, or if it was all the wild predators we released in their house, but somehow, some way, we killed the like button. And I know this because the ghost of the like button paid me a visit last night. And after slapping me right in the anti-tragus and then pouring fox urine in my eyes, the ghost of the like button said, "Listen here, Mr. Ballen, if you want to bring me back to life and keep up with your antics, you need to bring me one piece of brand new Mr. Ballen merchandise." And I said, "Are you kidding me? Of course! We just launched a brand new merch line called Ballin Basics on shopmrballen.com right in time for the holidays. Ballin Basics has all your Mr. Ballen essentials, like a sick hoodie, a great crew neck. Heck, there's even a special collector's item, the old Sigalang pin. And they're all numbered. There's only 500 of them,
Dark,
so
strange,
get them while
amphibious.
supplies last. So again, go to shopmrballen.com. Ballin Basics is live right now, so get your new merch, get your collector's item pin, old Sika-lang! Meanwhile, I'll work on resurrecting the like button so we can continue to find fulfillment in our lives by slipping some mayonnaise in the like button's peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Happy holidays, everybody! Go to shopmrballen.com.
Oh!
That hurt me. I'm not the only one that wears flannels with shorts. Yes. Yes.
Oh. Table for two.
On the morning of August 2nd, 2017, two men sat together laughing inside of a bar in a tiny village in northern France. The men were named Lucien Perrault and Olivier Boudin, and even though there was a massive age difference between them, Lucien was 69 years old and Olivier was 38 years old, the two were totally inseparable, to the point where the people in the village referred to them as father and son. Lucien had spent his whole life working in manufacturing in a nearby city, but just 4 years earlier, he had finally retired and he had moved into a small home inside of this northern French village. But when he had first moved into this new home, he had been very lonely and sad. You know, Lucien was divorced, he struggled with alcohol, and he had had a really tough life, and he just wasn't doing well. But when he met Olivier, his whole life turned around. When the two met, Olivier also was kind of like a down-on-his-luck guy. He was struggling with some health issues that made it hard to work, and so for years he had been bouncing between the nearby city and this village in northern France, looking for work, somewhat unsuccessfully. And so when these two happened to connect, it's like they bonded over having kind of difficult lives. And for Lucien, what really mattered to him was Olivier, despite being so much younger than him, did not treat Lucien like he was this dried up, worthless old man. He treated Lucien like a peer. And so together, these two very unlikely best friends began kind of orchestrating their lives around the other. And before long, it was like their lives had all this new structure and routine and meaning to them, because again, the two men got to be together basically all day long. So on this particular morning, as Olivier and Lucien were together at this bar, they began talking about what they wanted to do that night. And they settled on having a barbecue at Lucien's house. Lucien would cook up some beef and they would sit out on his back garden patio and just spend the night together. It sounded like a wonderful plan. And in fact, the bartender would say that when Olivier and Lucien finally left the bar that day, that he recalled overhearing them being so excited about this particular barbecue. And so that evening, Olivier and Lucien arrived at Lucien's house and they went out to the back patio where Lucien had already draped a nice tablecloth over this small round table. It was a red and white checkered patterned tablecloth, and on this table was an open bottle of wine and some cheese and a baguette. And so Olivier, he sat down and began enjoying some wine and bread, and Lucien walked over to the grill and began cooking up the beef. Lucien had a neighbor. We're going to call her Marie because we don't actually know her real name. And Marie's second floor window overlooked Lucien's garden patio where the two men were having this cookout. And so that night, Marie did glance out and saw the two men kind of listening to music and goofing around. And she was used to them spending lots of time together. And she was also used to them staying up late at night. And so she figured, you know, tonight's going to be another one of those nights where these guys are up late, having wine, celebrating, whatever. You know, she was just going to shut the window and try to ignore the noise coming in and just let them do their thing. And so eventually Marie would do that. She would go to bed to the sound of music coming from next door and the sound of men talking. And then the next morning, when Marie got up around 6 a.m., she looked out that window again and frankly was not that shocked at what she saw. Lucien was still just sitting at the table, looking like he could be eating some bread or still drinking wine, and Olivier had clearly passed out on the ground. Now, Marie didn't judge. She knew these two liked to stay up late and drink and do stuff like this, and so she thought, you know what? None of my business. Then at 9 a.m., so 3 hours after Marie had first woken up, she left her house to go to another neighbor's house to feed their chickens while they were away for the day. As she passed by Lucien's house, she glanced into his back garden patio, and she saw Lucien was still just sitting at the table, and Olivier was still passed out on the ground. It was like they hadn't moved for 3 hours. But again, Marie's thinking, none of my business. And so she just kept on going, went to her neighbor's house and fed the chickens. But when Marie came back to her house 3 hours later, around noon, she looked again into Lucien's backyard, and she saw the two men still had not moved. Lucian is sitting at the table
Come
and
on!
Olivier is laying on the ground. And suddenly Marie's thinking, wait a minute, the sun is high in the sky right now. These guys aren't moving. They're going to get heat stroke. We got to do something about this. And so she yelled out to Olivier and Lucian, but she got no response. And so Marie just walked into Lucian's backyard.
Oh, those
and as
fucking
she got
assholes.
closer and closer to the two men, she realized that they were not moving at all. Like, they were not breathing. Something was horribly wrong here. And so Marie, she just turned and ran to another neighbor's house. She told them what was going on, and they got these big pots of water, and they ran back and doused Olivier and Lucian with water, trying to get them to snap out of their drunken stupor. But the two men did not move at all when the water hit them. Clearly, they were dead. The next day, the local prosecutor announced there was going to be an investigation into the two men's deaths, which were being classified as criminal acts. And the prosecutor also said that it seemed like Lucian and Olivier died at the same time, and so most likely this was either a double homicide or a murder-suicide, and the primary theory as to what killed the two men was poison put in their food. And so police sent off the canned beans the two men were eating to this institution in Paris to test it for something called botulism, which is a deadly toxin that will grow inside of canned foods. But it came back negative. And then also police sent off the rest of the food the two men were eating to various other laboratories to be tested for poisons. And again, all of it came back negative. There was nothing that the police could detect in any of the food they ate. And so police were kind of confused for a minute. But then the autopsies came back for Olivier and Lucian, and everything changed. Lucian and Olivier were not murdered. This was not a murder-suicide. They didn't die from botulism or from some poison in their food. They died because of a set of very particular circumstances. Both Lucian and Olivier suffered from non-fatal minor medical issues. Lucian had bad dental health and so was missing a couple of teeth, and Olivier was suffering from a heart condition called cardiomegaly, which means his heart was slightly enlarged and somewhat fragile. However, his condition was totally being monitored by doctors and was under control. But just for a second, on the night of August 2nd, 2017, when Lucian and Olivier were having that cookout in Lucian's backyard, their non-fatal minor medical issues suddenly became a really, really big deal. Lucian cooked up a big plate of beef rib. Now, beef rib can be difficult to chew even when you have all your teeth and take your time, but Lucian was missing teeth, and he loved this beef rib so much, he was wolfing it down really quickly, and so he wasn't chewing it enough, and at some point, he swallowed a particularly big unchewed bite, and he began to choke. And when that happened, his best buddy, Olivier, sitting across from him, he stood up to try to help his friend, who's basically dying right in front of him, and the stress of this moment caused his heart to seize up, his heart, which is already enlarged and fragile, and he had a heart attack and died. And then Lucian, who now has no one to help him, continued to sit at the table trying to get this beef out of his throat, but he couldn't, and he eventually asphyxiated and died as well, hunched over at the table.
Pause it, pause it, pause it, pause it. I feel bad because I almost laughed because it's so unreal.
Yeah.
And then I thought oh my god, before it said why, I thought maybe both of their minor medical things, okay, me talking about I believe in all this, I'm not the skeptic and I believe in all this bullshit, and I was like, oh my god, I don't know that I believe the whole father-son thing. And I was like, maybe, they just, couldn't, live without each other. And, their medical thing just lined up. And so that they, could die at the same time because they couldn't bear to live without each other. My brain. But in reality, it's truly horrific because they both saw it's, the total opposite. Dude.
That is
and without
so
autopsies, you would never know. You would never know. You would never know.
No.
So before there were how.
That is so heartbreaking and sad, dude. He just saw his homie struggling, and it wrecked his heart, and they both died, dude.
And he just sitting there still and saw him
having a heart
pass
attack
out.
while he's strangling to death.
God.
That is horrific.
That just doesn't even seem like a possibility. That seems like a terrible plot to a movie. Wow. Like, I couldn't imagine.
Oh, I know.
Wow.
Or you and your best friend, or me and mine, you know?
Oh, I'd be so mad. I'd be so mad. I'd be dying. I'd be fucking furious.
God, that sucks. Wow.
I can't help but just have a reaction, a big reaction to the lady. And I know people already in the comments are going to say, like, oh, well, you wouldn't really know. Okay, I have PTSD, so my first instinct is they're dead. I ain't going to pour water on you. I'm calling 911.
Right. Yeah, no, Nikki and I are both hypervigilant.
Damaged.
Like, we have a lot of trauma in our life, so we expect everything to be horrible. So
I
if
see
I
you
call,
sitting. Oh, I'm call.
If we call each other and the other one doesn't answer, worst
dead.
Case scenario,
You're dead.
we're already freaking out.
And it was like a freak, horrific accident.
Yeah, I would also feel really bad as the neighbor. I would feel really.
I didn't even think
a lot
about
of guilt.
Well, also.
But you're not rational. You always feel guilt in situations like that.
I was gonna say, like, you couldn't really feel like guilty about like not calling because they'd already.
I have friends.
But you were upstairs while it happened.
I have a couple of friends. Well, more than a couple. A handful of friends that were on a hike, and when they were on a hike, there's this area that had like a reservoir, and they just heard people screaming. So they went over to see what was going on, and this guy had tried to make a horse. Listen, he was riding a horse and tried to make the horse swim.
You can't make a horse do shit.
The horse got into too deep of water and freaked out with him locked in on the saddle and started flipping around. And so the horse drowned with him on it.
Oh, the horse died too?
Yeah, because this guy took a horse into deep water, and it pretty much broke his fucking neck under the water. But his wife is there screaming.
Oh, well,
his family's there freaking out. So my friends get him and like start performing CPR until like wildlife emergency services get there. He was obviously already dead.
But you got to do what you got to do.
And they all struggle with, we weren't able to save him. Even though
this guy
was probably already.
Yeah.
And let me say this, not to speak ill of the dead, but it's extremely fucking stupid to do that to a horse.
Yeah.
But
I can't feel bad, but I was just like, oh, the horse died. Well, sometimes when you put yourself in harm's way,
he won the Darwin Awards that day.
Bad things truly happen, and that horse
really
did not
stupid.
deserve it.
No, it didn't.
But if you make really, really, really poor choices, and it happens, like, come on.
Right. But my point of telling that story is,
yes,
we as human beings, those of us who have empathy, which is most of us, when you're in a situation where someone dies, even if you're the one who's trying to save them and you've done nothing but the right thing, you still feel guilty.
Yeah.
And even if it's like one of your friends or something, you know, like survivor's guilt is also a thing. People feel guilt. Like, even it's something similar happens, it's not as bad, but like when someone you love dies, and then you like, I didn't spend enough time with them.
Yeah.
I wish I would have said this. I wish I would. The finality of death makes it difficult for us to not say, but I should have, but, you know, how can I?
Like, what would the outcome have been had I done this?
Right.
But a lot of the time.
Yeah. But all of them have their varying degrees of struggle to this very day because of that incident. Yeah. And that is just a testament to how our brains try to grapple with death. So I'm sure that this lady had some kind of guilt.
Then,
even though they were obviously already dead when she saw them.
As it is, like, her trying to, like throw water on them and stuff, and they were already, like, it's not like she just saw them from like 50 feet away and we're like, oh my God, they're dead.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it was a up close and personal situation.
Right.
Which makes it a lot harder.
Yeah.
From experience, it makes it a lot harder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, DB, I had the same experience when my uncle died. Like, I just felt like I should have visited him more. You know, I did. I went out of my way to visit him, you know, like 40 minutes. Like when I was going to wrestling training and he was dying of lung cancer, I would drive like 40 minutes out of the way. I did a couple of times just to go and spend time with him while he was sick. And you just can't help but feel like, I should have done this. I should have done that. I was in training for the Navy when my grandfather died, and I couldn't even go to his funeral. So, and it wasn't the Navy's fault. They were like, dude, if you need to go, then go. But my dad was just like, he would want you to do what you're doing. And you should finish what you're doing, because it would have set me back in my path in my service pretty bad. But like, yeah, I'm sure she dealt with some kind of...
Oh, she has PTSD for sure.
Something probably like that, you know. But
I mean, not everybody gets it, but...
it does happen a lot.
Happens.
It does happen a lot.
It happens.
I had a bit of a traumatic experience when I was working at the clinic. When one morning we came to work... And well, it's just another one of those things where you find something going on.
mrballen videos tend to
this is what it's about. There was somebody having a heart attack out in the parking lot, and they were just mashing the horn. And we just kept hearing somebody laying on the fucking horn, and we're like, what the fuck is going on, dude?
And you get annoyed.
Yeah, this asshole. And then we go out there, and this person had driven to our clinic, which was just like a family health clinic.
But it's probably closest.
We can't do anything for you but call emergency services. So we did, and they, you know, we had very talented doctors there who did everything that they could, and they got him
stable.
I don't know.
Okay.
That's the thing that I was going to say. One of the ways in a situation like that where we were able to not attach ourselves to, did this guy die? We don't know.
Oh, I'd have to know.
We don't know.
I'd have to know.
You can't. He's not your patient anymore.
Oh, they just don't tell you?
No.
Man, that would bother me.
There are several situations when I worked at that clinic where emergency situations happened. They got them out of there, and we never knew what happened after that.
Oh,
there was an old lady.
I need all the information.
There was an old lady who was getting her medicine and fell and broke her arm like right here, and her femur was also questionable as maybe broken, and you can bleed out just from a broken bone in your femur. And she was like 80 something. Hit her head. There was a swelling, you know. And again, we're just running stuff to the doctors to help them with whatever they need. Yeah. We're like, go get this. Boom, boom, boom. And we had no clue. Still to this day, no idea. I know that she was alive when they put her in the ambulance. After that, it is no longer my job, nor is it appropriate for the rest of the patients I'm going to see the rest of the day for me to be concerned with that. So that's just how you handle that when you work in those environments.
So I've had a similar experience, but it went a totally different way. So like I said earlier, I have PTSD. I lost a loved one to a very traumatic death that I saw.
But we're not a part of.
But found them, and it is horrific and fucks with me to this day, and it's been like almost 10 years in a couple days. But watching someone else have that experience is totally wild. Because while you're experiencing it, you're very much in your feels, in your moment.
Yes.
And how you're reacting, you can't even think about that.
Right.
So when I was working at the pharmacy, I was a pharmacy tech for a little while. The pharmacist that I worked with had a guy before I worked there who just dropped dead of a heart attack in line waiting for his meds. Okay?
I'm telling you, at the desk waiting for medicine, shit goes down. I've seen some interesting stuff.
Same. This is one of them. All right? So he's fucked up. All right? It just weighs on him because he had to be the person who was call 911. He knows to do CPR.
Yes.
He's trying to save this guy. Not going to happen. Okay? So this lady comes in who wants a certain type of med filled before she can have it filled.
Interesting.
And she's so mad that she can't have this medicine that
Controlled
we're legally
substance.
not allowed to give her before like 3 more days. All right. So she starts throwing a fit, and we're like, dude, like we can't give it to you.
Yeah, fuck off.
And she's just increasingly getting angry. She starts potentially having a panic attack, but I don't know if she was having a panic attack. Triggered. And it was before I really knew. It's before I went and got my psych degree. I don't know what's going on. I just know some crazy shit's going down. He stops what he's doing as soon as she starts doing that. Runs and grabs an inhaler of some kind. I don't know. Runs over. Doesn't jump the thing, but is just like slamming the thing open. There's patients everywhere. Pulling the stuff. Like, who knows how expensive this is? Can he replace it? Is that legal to do? I don't know. And it's trying to give her this stuff, but she don't want it. Because
she's acting.
Because it's a situation. But he had a whole situation happen because she did that.
Right. It weighs on people.
Yeah.
I'm sure that lady's fucked up, and I just feel like it really sucks that people who are trying to help have to go through shit like that.
Absolutely.
That's why you really need to have respect for EMTs. Have respect for EMTs. A lot of them.
Look how red I am.
A lot of
Just talking about
EMTs
that.
are carrying so much baggage.
I couldn't imagine. There's no way.
So much baggage.
No way.
Back to the video.
All right. We said we weren't going to rant, but
These videos are about the rant.
we did react to the GTA 6 trailer, Ben.
I'm going to have to remember to edit that.
Sorry. You probably won't.
I probably won't. Hi.
A little after 7 a.m. on the morning of April 15th, 2007, 3 men launched a 35-foot white catamaran called the Kaz 2 from a marina in northeastern Australia, kicking off what was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. The captain of the Kaz 2 was 56-year-old Des Batten, and for months he'd been training for this trip. And the 2 friends that Des was bringing with him on this trip were Jim Tunstead, who was 63 years old, and Jim's brother, Peter Tunstead, who was 69 years old. All 3 of the men had spent a lot of time plotting their actual course they'd be going on, which was from this marina on the northeastern side of Australia, up and around the north side, and then down the western coast to Perth, which was their final destination, and where all 3 men lived. In total, this trip was supposed to take 8 weeks, and all 3 men were absolutely giddy with excitement at the prospect of spending an entire 2 months basically just drinking beers and fishing. Now, Des, Jim, and Peter were not the types to blow off responsibility to go party. I mean, they were devoted family men. All of them had been married for 30 plus years. Des had 2 kids, Jim had 4 kids, and Peter had 5 kids. But they were all either retired or nearing retirement, and this trip was going to be kind of a way to celebrate the end of an era. And while all 3 of them had gone on other big sailing trips, this one easily was the biggest one in terms of the distance they were covering and how much prep went into it and how expensive it was. I mean, this was like 10x the scope and scale of any other sailing trip they had done. And so, on April 15th, 2007, shortly after the 3 men had launched their boat and kicked off this big trip, Peter's wife would call him just to see how it was going. And she would say, you know, Peter was in great spirits, and she could hear the other two men laughing in the background, and it sounded like they were about to start fishing and maybe have a couple of beers. And so it seemed very much to Peter's wife like this trip was going as well as it could be so far. And so eventually Peter told his wife that he had to go, he told her he loved her, and then they hung up. Now, Des, who was the captain of the Kaz-2, was adamant about safety being the top concern for this trip. Even though all three men were relatively healthy and had a lot of sailing experience, and even though Des was a member of a volunteer marine rescue group and so literally could be called on to go perform rescues at sea, despite all this experience and know-how, before they kicked off this trip, Des made Jim and Peter go through all these man overboard drills on the Kaz-2 to make sure they knew how to do it if for some reason, you know, an emergency arose out at sea. And so the men got really comfortable using all the life-saving equipment and going over all the procedures. And then also when they charted their course, Des stressed that at no point should they be sailing into open water. They needed to stay close to shore the whole time just because it was safer. And so when Jim began filming a video around 10 a.m. on the day they set sail for this trip, you can clearly see the shore in the background of this video. So they're following the course they had planned. But a couple of hours after Jim had shot that video on the day they left, a woman named Isabel Wheeler, who did not know Des, Jim, or Peter and had never seen the Kaz-2 before, she was fishing in an area called Champagne Bay when she looked out into the water and she saw the Kaz-2, a white 35-foot catamaran, sailing east to west across the horizon. And then at some point, as Isabel was watching this boat, which really meant nothing to her, she just happened to be watching it, she saw it make a quick 90-degree turn and began sailing out towards the open ocean away from the coastline. Now, remember, Isabel knows nothing of this boat or its occupants, and so has no idea that Des, Peter, and Jim had been so clear about at no point will we sail into the open ocean. It's too dangerous. Stay close to shore. She didn't know that. And so she just saw a ship turning and sailing out to the open water, and she thought, okay, whatever. You know, so she didn't go and report what she saw. It was only later on when details emerged about what happened on the Kaz-2 that she would later come forward and say, hey, I saw that boat and this is what they did. The next day, April 16th, two more people would spot the Kaz-2. These were two men who also did not know Des, Peter, Jim. They didn't know Kaz-2. They didn't know Isabel. In fact, these two men didn't know each other, but independently on this day, they looked out near Champagne Bay and they saw the Kaz-2 sailing east to west in the exact same spot that Isabel had seen it the day before. Now, remember, the Kaz-2 was traveling from that marina on the northeast side of Australia all the way around to Perth. It was a point A to point B trip. There was no reason the Kaz-2 would ever double back and be in the same place 24 hours later, but here we were 24 hours later, and two more people are seeing the Kaz-2 in the same place that Isabel had seen it, and so that made no sense. But again, these two men who saw the Kaz-2, they just saw it and thought nothing of it because they don't know anything about this boat. It wasn't until later that they eventually came forward with what they saw. Then, one more day after that, on April 17th, there were these fishermen that were out in their boats a little farther north of Champagne Bay, where Isabel and the two other men had seen the Kaz-2 on consecutive days. And these fishermen, they spotted the Kaz-2, and again, these fishermen do not know the Kaz-2, they don't know its occupants, they're just seeing this ship, except this time, the fishermen, when they saw the Kaz-2, they thought something was wrong, because they saw the Kaz-2 from a distance, navigating its way fairly close to shore in an area that these fishermen knew was full of coral reefs. It's a very dangerous area to be piloting any ship. In addition, the sail of the Kaz-2 was totally ripped to shreds. And so the fishermen, they're looking at the ship, wondering what they're doing, but the pilot of the ship looked so in control as he's navigating his way through the coral reefs that the fishermen thought, okay, he knows what he's doing, so, leave him alone. But again, later on, they would report what they saw. It wasn't until the next day, April 18th, so 3 days after Des, Peter, and Jim had set sail, that anybody realized there was an issue with the crew of the Kaz-2. because on April 18th, a Coast Watch surveillance helicopter was flying over the Great Barrier Reef, and they looked down and they saw the CAS-2 with its badly damaged sails piloting all around this very dangerous part of the water to be piloting. And so the crew on board the helicopter attempted to radio down to the CAS-2 to see if they were okay, but no one from the CAS-2 called back to the helicopter. And so as they're waiting for a response from the CAS-2, the helicopter crew is watching the pilot of the CAS-2 clearly, navigating the boat in between coral reefs. And it seemed like, despite the damage to the sails, he knew what he was doing. And so to the crew on the helicopter, this didn't really look like an emergency, but it seemed like something worth flagging. And so they called the Marine Police and said, hey, we have this ship here that's not responding. We think they're okay, but you might want to come take a look. And so the Marine Police, they would come out to the area where the helicopter had said they had seen the CAS-2, and when they got there, the CAS-2 was gone. At this point, the Marine Police got some information about the boat, CAS-2, and discovered who owned the boat and who was on this trip, so Des, Peter, and Jim, and the police would get in touch with all of their families, and they would all tell police that besides Peter's wife, who talked to Peter on that morning they left, no one had heard from any of the men. They had gone totally silent since that first day. And so when police heard this, they knew this had to be some kind of emergency, and so a search was launched to find the CAS-2. And 48 hours later, a rescue helicopter that was part of the search was about 80 or so miles off the northeastern coast of Australia when they looked down and they spotted the CAS-2. And it still had all torn up sails, and it was kind of spinning listlessly in the water. And from the helicopter, they couldn't see anybody on board the ship. It was totally vacant on the deck. Now, at this point, authorities really have no idea what's going on with this boat or its occupants. It was possible that maybe they had been hijacked, and so Des, Peter, and Jim could be held hostage down below, along with the people that took them hostage. Or maybe the boat just got stolen, and Des, Peter, and Jim are not on this boat, and that it's just the criminals on board, and again, they're down below, hidden from view. So authorities, they don't know, but they decided to take a risk and just send somebody down to get on that boat and just see what was going on. So a rescue officer on board the rescue helicopter named Corey Benson was lowered by a rope where he was dropped into the water, and then Corey swam by himself over to the CAS-2 and he climbed up the side of the boat and he stepped onto the deck, and right away he noticed it was kind of like eerily quiet on board the boat. There was nobody he could see, and there was no sign of any disturbance, minus the sails of the ship being all tattered. And for a second, Corey thought about maybe calling out for Des, Peter, and Jim to see if they were down below and could come up and solve this mystery. But then he also worried that if he called out, there could be some bad people on board this boat, and he didn't want to draw their attention. And so Corey was quiet and just began walking towards the front of the boat. And as he did, he began to notice signs that people must have recently been on board this boat doing normal things. Like, for example, there was a fishing rod that was cast out into the water that was anchored to a post on the side of the boat that looked like it had just been operated minutes ago. There was a blue mug of coffee that was just sitting on a table that looked like maybe someone had been drinking from it recently. There was a neatly folded t-shirt on another chair with a set of glasses on them. I mean, there was just all these kind of tells that this was a boat that was being used recently. And when Corey actually got to the front of the boat where the captain would stand, he saw the engine was actually still on. It was idling. And so Corey turned it off. Now, at this point, Corey knew his next step was going down the stairs and opening up the door that led into the cabin down below to see if Des, Peter, and Jim were down there. But he also knew when he went down there, despite there being backup up in the helicopter and more people making their way out here, Corey would be all alone if there were criminals or bad people down there. But this was his job. And so after taking a deep breath, he turned and walked down the few steps, and he got to the door that led to the cabin. He grabbed the handle and he opened it up. And the room he was walking into was kind of like a half living room, half kitchen area. And he saw there was this table, and on it was a newspaper that was dated April 15th. So the day the CAS set sail. And then on the wall behind the newspaper was a calendar where days had been marked off all the way through April 14th. April 15th was not marked off. But also nearby on a table was a computer that was still plugged in and on and looked very much like someone had just been using it. And also there were plates of food that were out that didn't look that old that also seemed like people must have just been eating from them. And then also Corey could see past this common area into the bedroom, and very obviously the bunks inside of there had been slept in. And so basically everything seemed like it was where it should be. There was just one problem. Des, Peter, and Jim were not on this ship. There was no sign of where they were. They were just gone. And there was nobody else on board the ship. It was just completely abandoned with no sign of what happened. Des, Jim, and Peter were never found. And so we have no idea what actually happened to them.
They did that.
Nor do we have any idea why they were seen by Isabel and the two men and the fishermen doing all these weird things, like randomly piloting out towards open water, which totally went against their plan, which was stay close to shore, be safe. Or, you know, why on that second day they were seen in the same spot near Champagne Bay, indicating they had doubled back after going towards open water. You know, that went against their plan, which was point A to point B. Yeah. Why are they doubling back around? And so, unfortunately, this whole thing is just one big mystery that has yet to be solved.
Damn.
Okay. Like, I would feel horrible if it wasn't true. So, yeah. Obviously, I don't know. But it is interesting that there's just nothing. So either they got taken for whatever reason and their boat wasn't taken, which is valuable. Yeah. Doesn't make sense. And it's not like they're like held for ransom or anything, because like their family would totally tell that. Yeah. Right? Okay. So like in my mind, they just said, okay, we're out.
I don't know.
We're out of here. We're, like, I don't know.
I mean,
what else?
It just...
I'm thinking of like a Lifetime movie.
Because it's not like they got robbed.
Right. Everything was there. Everything was just there.
I don't know. That boggles my mind a little bit. Especially when they've got forensic investigators on it who can't figure it out and stuff. I mean...
I'm thinking like... Because what confused me was they said like they could see the captain, and I was like, well, that doesn't make sense, because my theory was like they're not there, or they're down in the bottom and they're dead, and the boat's just doing whatever it wants to do because it's on, and
maybe they ran off to Thailand.
I just feel like they're like, all right, this is our
I don't know. That one's one that I don't have enough details to even honestly make any kind of assessment as to what I think could have happened, other than they disappeared. Whether that was voluntary or involuntary, I have no clue.
Because I for sure thought, something's happened to the captain. Something's going on.
You think he just lost his marbles?
And the other two are dead. Or they're all dead.
Yeah. Who knows?
But that didn't happen.
Great video by Mr. Ballen. We appreciate you guys hanging around for this reaction, and we will see you next time.